All right, let's get started. We're going to talk about negotiating principles in the general sense, and I'm going to lay it out for you in some really basic principles that we can learn, use, and apply immediately in our role-playing scenarios in the foreclosure process. In my experience, negotiating breaks down to three basic simple things. Number one is build rapport. Number two, identify the problem. Number three, come up with a solution. It sounds a little oversimplistic, but you got to keep that in mind as you're approaching the process. Instead of just getting on the phone and having a discussion and trying to create a negotiating scenario, really kind of break it down into those three simple things. And when you get lost, go back to that formula. A lot of times people forget to create rapport, so they try to jump right into three, which is the solution. Solution can't be had until you know the problem. They're not going to tell you the problem until they trust you and create rapport. So when you get lost in the process, go right back to one. Okay, let's create rapport. Let's get them to reveal what the real problem is. Let's try and offer a solution. Now, the thing is that the seller is always lying to you. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, that he's not going to come right out and tell you what they really want. The seller might say, what I want is $200,000 for my property. That's not what they really want. What they want is a solution. What they want is X amount of dollars net. What they want is the problem solved by Tuesday. What they want is I got to move into my new house. So it's your job to get them to reveal what the real honest intentions are. Same thing with a loss mitigator. Same thing with dealing with any party in a real estate transaction. You're trying to get them to reveal that. And they're not going to reveal that until you create rapport where they're going to trust you enough to tell you exactly what it is that they want. So let's start and break that down. Number one is creating rapport. Rapport can be created in a number of ways on a what you have in common scenario or on a subliminal way that they think that you are just like them. I think that the latter is an easier one to build, but let's start with the former, just building commonality with them, sympathizing with them, trying to identify with them in a way that is intellectual. So if they say they like the Rockies, you like the Rockies. If they say they hate politicians, you hate politicians. Trying to create some sort of commonality, but what I would try to do, whether it's on the telephone or whether it's in person, to be sincere about it. If you try to be fake and try to say, oh, I like the Rockies too, and they start throwing out baseball players and you don't know their names, you're going to sound like an idiot and they're going to see right through that. So just be honest, and sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's this person came from a different background, they're in a different scenario. You're thinking in your mind, how the hell could someone be in this scenario? I mean, what kind of, quote, loser are they? I would never do this. Why didn't they solve their problem before? So you may not be able to identify with them on that level, but in some other way, as human beings, you can identify with them and get them to trust you in a way that they feel like they're going to reveal what they want to you. On the phone, it's a little more difficult. You're only going to hear one thing, and that's voice. So what you kind of try to do is, to some extent, match their voice patterns. Now, some people, whenever I tell people this, they think they're going to think that I'm making fun of them. They don't hear that. People, when you talk to someone on the phone, how many people have ever spoken to someone on the phone and just immediately had rapport by the way they sounded? You listened to them and they said, wow, you just liked them just because of the way they talked. Forget about what they said, that's just the words, but the sound of their voice, the way they talk. See, me coming from New York, when I get people who talk fast like me and they have a New York accent, immediately I turn on. I just say, wow, they're like me. Now, it doesn't matter whether they have absolutely nothing in common with me. They didn't go to school, or they don't play golf, or they have nothing in common with me. The fact that they talk like they're from New York automatically turns me on. Does that make sense? No. So, well, you're not a New Yorker. That's why it doesn't make sense. But you can create that rapport. So the thing you have to do is kind of listen in the beginning and try not to talk too much to hear the way they talk. Some people are fast talkers. Some people are slow talkers. Get to learn the sound of their voice. Now, if they've got a heavy Southern accent, you don't have to put on a heavy Southern accent, but you might be cognizant of the fact that if you're from Jersey, you got to drop the Jersey accent because they're probably not going to identify with you. You sound too different. But sometimes you never know. Maybe their husband or wife or cousin is from New York or is married to someone, and you remind them of that person. So sometimes you just never know. But trying to match the tone, the pace. So if they're a slow talker, you try to be a slow talker, and that's tough for me. If they're a soft talker, then you try to be a soft talker, because they're gonna respond to what sounds like them. So if you're talking fast and hard and you're loud and they're kind of, you're just going to lose rapport immediately. So try to match them in a certain way. Now, when you get in person, it's different. You're going to have to not just have the vocal, you have the visual cues. Now, Tim talked about dressing. That's important. When you show up to dress, if you're dressed really fancy and they're dressed like a slob, they may look at you like a suit, and they're going to immediately lose rapport. On the other hand, if you dress too down, they might look at you as being a slob or unprofessional, or I don't know if you can handle my problem because you don't look successful enough. So you want to look, obviously, professional, neat, but not overdressed. You got to look like a business person. So you can't show up like a slob, but you don't want to overdress for the occasion. So that's the visual part of it. The other part of it is immediately when you have discussions with them, the same thing. If you hear the sound of their voice, if they seem like a slow, laid-back person, then you should try to be a little slow and laid back. There are different patterns, too, of people who communicate in certain ways, and this is called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And this is a study of how people use the language and words to communicate. And people generally, and this I'm saying generally, they fall into three main categories of primary ways of communication. There are visual people, there are auditory people, there are people who are primarily kinesthetic. Now, not too often you will find someone who's a caricature of each one, but you should sort of pay attention to how they communicate. And you can hear it in the words and the language that they say. Visual people tend to look up. And sometimes when you ask them a question, say, hey, can you remember a time where everything was working good for you? Can you think of that time right now? Can you think of that time right now? Sure. Yeah, so you're looking right at me. He's not thinking back. Let me ask you a question. Can you recall a time when you were, let's say, my age, and and you had a specific memory about an event that happened? See, he immediately looked to this, right, he immediately looked up, so he's thinking of a visual memory. So when you start talking to people, when you ask them questions, ask them to recall things, and they're constantly looking up, they're looking for a visual memory. And it's not always, but you can see a pattern of how people do. Visual people, I'm a visual person, tend to talk fast. Some people think that I'm auditory. I'm not. Just because I talk a lot, it usually means because the patterns in my head are moving in pictures and moving so fast that I can't get them out. So if people who are fast talkers are not auditory, generally they're visual people. So when you talk to them and say, can you see how this would work for you, Mr. Stellar? Can you get a picture of how this works? Can you see this? You want to talk in visual words so they communicate and they understand that. Now, auditory people generally are very precise with their words. They tend to, when you ask them questions and recall memories, they tend to look to the sides or look straight forward. And they'll use words like, that sounds good to me. Does that ring a bell? And you have to try to use language that communicates in the way that they understand. So if you say, hey, does that ring a bell? How does that sound to you? Does that ring a chord? Does this sound good? Are you hearing what I'm saying? So you have to communicate on the level that they like to communicate at, primarily. Then there are people who are primarily kinesthetic. Those people have to get a gut feeling about it. They tend to be more quiet, they tend to be slower. And don't confuse a slow talker like that as being dumb or slow. That's just the way they process. Sometimes they have to get a gut feeling for that. Try that on for size. How does that feel to you? Does that grab you? That is a kinesthetic person. So you won't automatically get this. Sometimes you'll meet people and it's so obvious that you're almost going to laugh. You're going to say, oh my gosh, that person's so kinesthetic. It's just so obvious. Usually if you're dealing with houses in Boulder, you will find the Birkenstocks, dead giveaway. Not always, though. Not always, though. So people who are primarily groovy, I got to get a feeling for that. Those are people who like to get an internal, and they tend to be slower in processing, too. You can't push those people as hard because they tend to process a little bit slower. Not that they're dumb, not that they're thick. It's just that that's the way they have to try it on, and it takes a little longer. And I'm sure you've come across people like that in your life where you talk to them, you talk to them, you talk to them, and it would take weeks and months, and finally when it's sort of like they got comfortable with it, they got a good feeling about it, then they would react. So keep that in mind. And creating the rapport is the way you communicate with them is primarily going to influence how they're going to react to it and how they're going to feel about you, or how they'll see you, or how it sounds to them. You understand? Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Just keep those things in mind. Also, you will find that there are people who communicate and are convinced in different ways. So, for example, some people are primarily internal people. That means they have to make the decision. I'm sure you've come across people like this before. No matter what you say, unless they thought of it first, it wasn't a good idea. I'm like that too. My wife will tell me, I don't like that idea. Then a week later, I go, hey, how about we do that? She goes, didn't I just say that to you? I'm like, I'm glad I thought of it. There are people like that. And there are other people, and I'd say more often than not, I'd say probably more than 50% of people are like that. But there are a large number of people that want to be told what to do. They're vacillators. I'm not sure. And you have to just say, hey, look, do this. Sign here, push it in front of them, put the pen in their hand, literally. And those people, that's the only way they're going to respond. And some of you may have met people like this you work with, or maybe they're your spouse. There are people primarily look to the outside, meaning they'll look to what other people do. So if you listen to what they're saying, and the important thing of all of this is shut up and listen. If you listen really carefully, Laura's talking about this a lot. She spends hours on the phone listening to people. God bless you. Because I'm too busy talking to listen to you. I'm a talker. It's like most people do is they take turns waiting for their turn to talk. That's not listening. You have to really listen to people to get an idea of what they're saying. And a lot of it's not listening to what they're saying, but how they're saying it. So then you could say, okay, this is how I'm going to communicate this person. This person appears to me to be visual. I'm going to speak in pictures. I'm going to communicate with them in that way. If you listen to a person talking and they're saying, well, my neighbor did this, and my friend did that, and the newspaper said this, what they're looking for is outside evidence of convincing. Does that make sense? So if you hear that language, you're going to be looking at a person who makes up their mind not upon what they think, but what other people think. So that's how you're going to communicate. Well, the way that most people do it, the way it's usually done, the way that your neighbor do it, the way the last people did it, and they'll be convinced because they think that that's how everyone else does it. Other people are internal, like, I don't give a crap what everyone else does. This is what I want. And you're going to have to do it that way. Say, hey, this is a good idea. What do you think? And you have to almost feed them the idea and let them come to the conclusion. Like, well, what do you think we should do, James? What do you think the best scenario is?
Well, I think that we ought to get right on it.
That's a great idea, James. You're a real smart guy. Instead of, I think we should get on it, don't you? No, he doesn't. He didn't come up with the idea. He's not convinced. This is very simple, but if you listen carefully and observe, you will notice the patterns. Some people are quick decision makers. I'm one of those. Sometimes to my detriment, but most of the time to my benefit. Okay, I look at it, see it, great, I'm convinced, let's do it. Other people, they need to see it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. And that's why salespeople will tell you that the average call that you'll make on a prospect is 7 times before you make a sale. So you have to, don't get discouraged because you talk to someone once on the phone and they say no. It doesn't mean that they're not interested. It just means that in their communication patterns, they can't hear it once and make a decision. That's just not their pattern of doing things in their life. It might be that they've had to see it once, had to see it twice, had to see it 3 times, and finally they are convinced. And that's a little harder to tell, but sometimes in the conversation, listen to the cues about, well, when I got my mortgage, I met with 1 mortgage broker, and I went with 2 mortgage brokers, and you might ask questions like that. Hey, when you got your loan, did you go with the first mortgage broker? Oh, no, I spoke to 1, then another, then a third, then a fourth. So you're thinking to yourself, well, this person may not talk to me. So you may tell them, look, hey, we're going to meet, and you don't have to make a decision. Talk to some other people, then call me back. Because that's the only way that they're going to feel good about their decision is they make sure they explored all our opportunities, where other people like myself is, okay, I need a TV today. There's the first store. I like that one. Let's go. And then the salesman starts talking me into the purchase. I go, look, you can only talk me out of it. Shut up. Doesn't that bug you? Because you're probably like that too. You see it, you want it, and he's trying to tell you what a good purchase you made. And I'm like, listen, stop selling. Yeah. Shut up. I already bought it. Take my credit card and get me out of here. I got 5 minutes. Let's move. So you're going to have to know what kind of person you're dealing with in terms of the pattern. And by asking them things like that, and sometimes you can be subtle about it. You're in their house and you're talking to them and say, hey, that's a great TV. You know, how many TVs did you look at before you bought that one? Oh, man, we went to Best Buy, then Circuit City, then we went to this one, I went to that one. I looked at 12 TVs. I read 3 magazine articles, one on the internet. I asked all my friends. You're going to get an idea of what kind of decision maker this person is. They're not going to just go with the first person. And you might want to ask them that. Have you talked to other people? How many have you talked to? Have you looked at other scenarios? How many did you look at? If they say, well, I haven't talked to nobody, you're the first person, you might be able to solve their problem right there. They might be the type of person that doesn't want to do all that. They just want to make a decision based upon what sounds good the first time. All right? Does this make sense? You all seeing how this works? Does this sound good?
Sounds great.
Is this grabbing you?
Looks good. Yeah. Feels great.
Feels good? All right. So that's the creating rapport part, using all those types of things to create rapport. Once you get the rapport going, then you're going to try to get them to reveal what the problem is. Because the problem isn't just they're in foreclosure. You've got to find out all their problems. Not necessarily that you give a crap, but you want to at least pretend to care about what their problems are. Because the only way you can offer a solution is to find out what the real problem is here. And maybe it's things you really don't want to know about their marriage and their kids and all those things. But you have to at least listen and pretend to care. Even if we care a little bit. You got to really listen. I mean, you have to ask questions and then listen. In court, attorneys will ask direct examination and then cross-examination. When you're asking direct examination, you're asking open-ended questions. So you're saying, tell me about your experience. How did that happen? On cross-examination is, look, you really did it, didn't you? It is a fact, isn't it? So you're looking for one-word answers. You don't want to be cross-examining the person you're dealing with. When you're selling, it's different. It's like, this makes sense, doesn't it, Jim? We would like to wrap this up right now, shouldn't we? I mean, when you're closing, you want to ask questions like that. But when you're trying to gather the information, you want to be very open-ended. And it's the 5 W's and H. 5 W's and H. I want to write that down. Who, what, where, when, why, how. Just tattoo that on your hand before you go and talk to a seller on the phone or talk to a seller in person. 5 W's and H. Every one of your questions should start out that way. How did you get in this situation? Why is it that this is happening this way? Who are some of the people you talk to? Start out every question with one of those and just let them spill their beans and just really try to be careful about being quiet. It's very difficult for people to be quiet, especially in America. Everyone's so busy and everything. It's not like going over to Thailand or Tahiti or Samoa. Everyone's just kind of quiet. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable, isn't it? 4 seconds. 4 seconds it took you to look away. That seemed like 20, didn't it? I just stared at you and was quiet. We're so uncomfortable with silence. So practice being, take a stopwatch on the phone. And when they stop talking, go, within 3 seconds, they'll keep going. So when you talk to a person on the phone, you ask them a question, and they go right to the end, and it seems like there's a pause, you pause. And then they'll start going more and more and more. Because they get uncomfortable with silence, especially on the telephone. A telephone, 3 seconds of silence sounds like forever.
Are you still there?
Are you still there? Yeah, I'm still here. Just do a lot of that. So try to resist the temptation when you talk to a seller on the phone or in person to be a sales presenter. Like, this is what we do. This is what we're going to offer you. Instead, just try to be quiet for most of the conversation, because most of the people will talk themselves into it. You can be like a psychiatrist. Why do you think that is? And do you remember the movie Analyze This? And he's just like, I'm paying you to ask me questions? Give me the answers, doc. And he's just like, why do you think that is? And how does that feel about that? That's all you're doing. Let them come to their own conclusions. A lot of the times, they'll tell you what they want to do. What do you think we ought to do, Bob? Well, how about I just deed you over the house and you take the property? Sounds good to me. You'd be surprised what people will suggest if you just ask. So be careful about being quiet, asking lots of open-ended questions, and they will spill their beans. No matter what it is that they ask. And if you get lost, the best thing you can do is to ask another question. So you start talking, and then you shut up, and they start talking, telling you stuff, and you don't know what to say. And you go, let me ask you a question, James. And then he pauses because now you've got control of the conversation. Whenever you ask a question, you're in control. So sometimes I don't know what I want to say. I say, let me ask you a question, James, and I'm thinking what I want to say next. So if you ever get lost of what you want to say, just ask a question, you immediately get in control of the conversation. Isn't that true?
That's right.
It works, doesn't it?
Usually does.
I just did it again, didn't I?
Did you?
I did, didn't I? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. What do you think?
That's a good question. What do you think?
Well, you like to be called Bill or William?
I don't know. What do you prefer? Always retain control of the conversation with a question. Isn't that true?
Well, has that been true in your experience?
It's been true in my experience. How about yours?
Usually, but not always. Is it always true in your experience?
I don't know. Most of the time. What about you?
Well, except for the other day when I was in the situation where I was standing in the grocery store. This lady asked me a question. I didn't know what to say, so I asked her a question. Do you think that was a good idea?
Oh, that's interesting. Why didn't you know what to say?
I was at a loss for words. She asked me about a recipe. What I know about recipes you can put in. Yeah, how are you with recipes?
I'm not bad. What about you? I haven't said a word. Oh, see how much he told me, and I didn't say a word.
That's very true.
So no matter what it is, if you ask a question, and no matter what, especially when it comes to objection, because at some point you're going to come to objections. So you get to the rapport, you get to the problem, and now you've identified the problem, you could start working on a solution. And a solution, again, you've got to be careful when you offer the solution. If they're a decision maker that wants to make a decision themselves, you have to let them make the decision. So sometimes, in terms of negotiating, I don't even want to throw out numbers. I'll say, you got a pen and paper there? Tell you what do you think this property's worth?
$138,000.
Okay, write that down, $138,000. Okay. What do you think it'll cost to fix this place?
What do you mean fix?
Well, fix it up so it goes to market. Have you ever done that before? Have you ever seen a house like that? All right. So, have you have a neighbor who sold their house pretty quickly?
Well, I was thinking it might cost about $10,000. Does that sound like a reasonable number to you?
10,000? You really think that'll do it?
Well, I was hoping it would. What do you think?
I don't know. Do you think it might be more?
I was hoping it might be less. What do you think?
I don't know. I haven't done this. Have you done this before?
Yeah, but not to this house.
Well, you think it might be more?
Well, you've done it to lots of houses, haven't you?
I have. It's a rough number, but you think it might be safe to estimate on the high side in case there are things that come across that you may not know how to fix or surprises? Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, what's your experience been?
This guy's a wise ass. Tell you what, I'm thinking it's more like 20,000.
Wow, that's high, isn't it?
I don't know, isn't it? Why would you say that? Why would you say high?
Wow, I used to sell building materials. Well, have you ever sold building materials?
No, I haven't. Tell me about it.
Have you bought them?
Yeah, I have. Some. What kind of building materials have you bought?
Oh, man. Bought or sold?
Bought and sold.
Well, I guess just about everything.
Yeah.
Have you found the need to buy more?
Everything. Interesting. I've only bought a few. Tell me more about everything. Whatever he says, I had another question. So we're just playing a game here. What I'm trying to get at is we're trying to get a number. So he thinks it's 10. I might think it's 20. So, okay, I might think it's 20, but I might be wrong. You might be right. He obviously sounds like a person who doesn't.
You're wrong?
He sounds like a person that wants to make a decision inside. So, I don't know. You might be right. You might be closer to me. I think it's 20. You think it's 10. But you're smarter than me, obviously. So why don't we put like 12? Why don't you write that?
How about 15?
15 would be fine.
Okay.
You think that'd be enough?
I think it might be more than enough.
Okay. All right. So what do you get there?
It's 123.
123. Okay. Good. You're good at math. Much better than me.
Probably not. You're really fast with words so
Oh, you're so kind. Let me ask you a question. Do you think what would you have you tried to list it with an agent?
You know, I was thinking about that. But I haven't really called any.
That's interesting. You would say that. How come you haven't called an agent?
Well, there's not a lot of room in the price here. I got to keep it pretty slim margin here.
So the price is important to you, isn't it?
Well, then that's important.
Okay. The net's important. So what does a real estate agent charge for commission these days?
Anywhere from 5 to 7%.
Okay. So it's about 6% of 123. What's that more or less?
Well, that's 6, and that's 13 to 2.
Okay. Okay. So why don't we subtract that off there?
Okay. Gosh, we're down to 1098.
1098. Okay, right around 100,000 then. Okay. Right around 100,000?
No, right around 10.
So somewhere between 90 and 110? That's called ranging. You know, we're trying to adjust the range. So as we start getting into it, see, the point of this exercise is to show you that he seems to be one person who wants to be in control, so I'm letting him control everything. Or let's let him think he's controlling everything. And that's what you got to do. So if he wasn't, if he seemed like a person that needed to be shown from the outside, then I'd be writing numbers and going, what do you think? Okay? So in terms of the numbers, whatever it is, I'm going to make him think he's smarter than me. Since he obviously is smarter than me. We're gonna adjust the ranges here. So he says, when he said 107, I said about 100, because I'm trying to range it down. He goes, no. He thinks 107 is closer to 110. So I'm trying to range him here from, 90 to 110. And he said, no, I think it's closer to 110. Okay, somewhere between 100 and 110 then. Somewhere between 100 and 110?
Maybe between 105 and 115.
Okay, somewhere between 105. So somewhere between 105 and 110?
Well, somewhere between 109 and 111.
Okay, so somewhere around 109?
110.
So we're ranging him. I'm adjusting ranges to try to get it dialed into what range he's comfortable in, and then we'll come up with a number with that.
109.
Okay, so at least I get to know sort of what his bottom line is. And the point of this exercise is really we're just question and answering. I'm just trying to get control of the conversation without being too, this is what I'm going to offer you, this is what we pay, this is what you're going to take, or you're not going to take. Now, if he were a person that was, I don't really know, seemed a little more not wishy-washy, but needed someone else to give him a scenario, then I would give him a scenario. Look, we can pay you A or we can pay you B. Which one do you want? Which sounds better, A or B?
A.
Okay, good. Now, it didn't occur to him that C, which is none of the above, was an option. But some people, they'll only take an option of one or A or B, and that's what they will take. So what we're trying to do here is identify the problem and work towards a solution that works for the both of us. Can you see how that will work for us?
It's got to work for everybody.
All right. It's got to work for everybody. Especially it's got to work for you. Can you see how this works for you? If you could imagine a perfect scenario to work this out, what would that be? What would be your ideal scenario that you can imagine?
Well, we have a positive net.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Move on to the next one.
That's an interesting question. What would you mean by a positive net? What does that mean?
Putting money in my pocket.
Putting money in your pocket?
Yeah.
And what kind of money would that be?
Good question. $10,000.
So somewhere between 5 and 10,000? All right, all we're trying to do is come up with a solution here. We're just working, inching towards a solution instead of me identifying his problem and saying, here's your solution. Some people that would work with. If you've identified the problem, if you get the feeling that they're the type of person that can't come to their own decisions, that's why they're here, you just say, okay, I have a solution for you. Here it is, A or B, pick one. Some people just don't respond to that at all. They need to work through this whole thing and come to it on their own. So he's that type of person. I'm just working towards him, towards that solution, and making him think that he's a part of designing that solution. And that's the way I would even phrase it. If I think he's a decision maker and needs to be part of it, and he needs to be in the driver's seat, then I'm going to say, hey, why don't you and I see if we can work to a solution together? Do you think we can do that? Instead of maybe you're the type of person that says, look, I can offer you a solution. Would you like a solution? Yeah, because I hadn't thought of one. Okay, here it is. Here's your solution. How does that sound to you? Does that look good to you?
Great.
Try this on for size. What do you think? How does that grab you? Feels good to you? All right, so that's all we're trying to do. Rapport, identify the problem, have a solution. Now, somewhere along that whole way, what you're going to run into is lots and lots of objections, and that's really the key. You're going to get curveballs thrown at you every step of the way. And it's impossible to figure out every other scenario other than role-playing them out to get the common ones. But it's important to how you handle those objections is going to be the key to the successful part of the negotiation. The important part, and it's a three-step process, it's identify the objection, reiterate it, offer a solution. Okay? So you've got an objection. What's your objection?
I need to stay in the house as long as I can.
Okay. Could you explain to me, so I really understand, as long as you can, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
If I can stay in the house 1 month longer than May 1st, then I don't care if I lose the house, I just need a place to go.
Okay, so if I understand, you'd like to stay in the house till May 1st, and that would work. That would be something that's very important to you. Do I understand that right? Okay, so I identified it, I reiterated it, I understand it. Okay, now we go to the resolution of it, if then. If we can have a scenario that would allow you to stay in the property till May 1st, then can we have a deal?
Yes.
Okay. Or maybe he might say, no, we don't have a deal. See, what you're trying to do is close doors and move to the next room. Sandler, how many people have heard of Sandler before? He's used to have a sales guy. He used to do training. I don't even think he's alive anymore. But he used to do this analogy of the submarine. When a submarine gets hit and fills with water, they close off that part of the submarine so it doesn't sink, regardless of who's in there. So what you want to do is like to prevent the sinking ship is every objection you go through, you want to close that door behind you, close it up, and then move into the next chamber. So if we've got an objection, I know that's not going to be the only one, I'm going to try to handle that objection and then close that out so we can move on to the next objection. So it's an if-then. He's identified the problem, I identify it with him, I make him understand that I understand his objection, and then I offer an if-then. If we can give you that, then can we move on to this? And a lot of times you may get stuck on that hard one, but let's say the objection is price. I've got to have $155. I may not be able to give you $155. So it may be, look, I understand that you got to get $155. And I don't know if I can get $155, but if we could resolve that, would that be the make or break of this deal?
Absolutely.
All right. I don't know if we can pay $155. So let's just, would it be okay if we just kind of put that over here and then talk about maybe the closing date for now?
Sure.
So sometimes you can't.
Yes.
You can't resolve that one objection on the spot. You're going to have to just say, I get that. Can we put that over there? Or the objection might be, well, how do I know that you're going to do what you say you're going to do? Would that be a pretty fair objection? Say, look, I understand that you have some concerns because you don't know me, I don't know you. You seem like a nice guy. You seem like you're going to do what you're going to say. I know I do what I'm going to say. So let's just kind of meet halfway for now. Let's trust each other that you're going to do what you're going to say in the transaction, and I'm going to do what I'm going to say. And let's just assume that for now. Can we just assume that for now, and then we'll just put that aside, and we'll get back to that later, and we'll just talk about some other stuff. All right? So otherwise, if you don't move that objection out of the way, it's going to keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. Even though you can't come up with a resolution to that, you just have to sort of let the other person know that you understand the objection, that it is important to them, that you may not resolve it now or ever, and let's just put that aside for now so we can talk about something else. All right? The only thing you have to be careful about is not brushing it off like, okay, I know you have this objection, but stop whining and let's put it over here so we can talk about something else. You don't want to be too quick to brush that off, otherwise they think that you don't care about that objection. Does that make sense? All right, you getting that? All right. So that's really the resolution of how you want to do this. If you ever get lost in the process and it starts to blow up, go back to number one. We're going to start recreating rapport. Try to if you get into a pattern where you're arguing with someone or it gets real bad and ugly, what you got to do is don't let it escalate. Break the pattern immediately. Like, hey,
Where did you say you were from in New York?
where'd you say you're from in New York? Hey, you like gum? Would you like a piece of gum? I mean, that's like totally break. I mean, they're into a blah blah blah. I got it, blah blah. Hey, and you just pull out a piece of gum. Would you like a piece of gum? You just totally broke exactly what the pattern was in. Or just, excuse me, I'm sorry. Do you have a restroom I can use? Yeah. Totally break them out of the pattern. So whenever it seems like it's getting escalated, whether it's on the phone or whatever, just have a pre-prepared out that you can break that pattern and try to start all over. Because if you start arguing, then all of a sudden jump into, so what about them Yankees? They're going to go, what? What the hell? We were talking about that. Don't try to change the subject on me. You want to make sure that you have something pre-planned that you can break it without looking like you're trying to weasel out of a conversation. Does that make sense? All right. Any questions, comments?
I like the question.
Frank.
One thing that we did sometimes in the scuba industry was called feel, felt, found, and it would be a good example of somebody how are we sure you're gonna do what you say you do? And you say, well, you know, I know how you feel, Bill. And we found that many other people have expressed the same concerns, but I think that you'll find, or others have found, that when they deal with us, we've got testimonials, that we're a good operation to do business with.
Excellent. Feel, felt, found. And I would add one more thing to that. I'm not a field person.
Yeah.
I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I dig. It depends your visual. So I would take that one step further and say, I hear what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I feel what you're feeling. Many other people have. Very common question. And the same thing with the objection, too. There is an objection. That's an excellent question. Very smart. A lot of people think the same way as you do. Now, that's only important, of course, if they care what other people feel. If you think that they're a me inside, they make decisions inside, then you need to tell them that, look, I know where you're coming from. You're a smart guy. I'm sure you've had this happen to you before, and then you have concerns. And that you found, I would take it one step further, found that all of our other customers were resolved. Or you'll find that if you trust us, we'll help you. So it's not just feel, it's handling the same concept, and then we're taking it just so it applies it just to that person. Excellent point. Excellent point. All right.